Today we have a couple of maxims. I'm Joseph, this is Input English. Today I'd like to offer you three shorter stories, and they each illustrate a maxim. So what's a maxim? A maxim is a saying, a proverb, an aphorism, words to live by. Maxims have been used since antiquity. They're a way for people to concisely give advice or make a point. Frequently, children are taught maxims. A penny saved is a penny earned. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. These are maxims. These are aphorisms or sayings, and they're based in real life. They have a reason to exist, and they have a history. So let me share a couple of stories that illustrate a couple of maxims in context, because people on this channel are not interested in memorizing lists of words or grammar rules. We are learning language implicitly with comprehensible input. We're absorbing it, we're bringing it in, we're picking it up, but we're not going to study it. If you want to know more about why we don't study languages, but rather acquire them with comprehensible input, I have a lot of videos on those topics. The first story occurred many years ago. My wife and I were traveling, and we went to Wyoming. In Wyoming, we visited the Grand Teton National Park and Yellowstone National Park. It was a spectacular trip. We flew into Salt Lake City and rented a car. That was the trip on which we drove our first Subaru. It was all-wheel drive, and it introduced us to the idea of a car that was a little more capable than what we were used to. Our tour of those two great national parks was truly memorable. But what happened in Yellowstone was particularly memorable, and that's what I'm going to tell you about today. We were in the area of Yellowstone, and we needed some fuel for the car. We needed some gasoline. So we pulled into a gasoline station and filled the car up. No problem. However, there was another car on the other side of the pump who had just finished filling up his car. It was a Volvo. While we were there, this fellow realized that he had just filled his tank with diesel fuel, but his car can't use diesel fuel. It's a gasoline-powered car. He was shocked. He didn't know what to do. He did have the wherewithal to not start the car. He knew that much. Gasoline-powered cars cannot use diesel, and if you try to run a gasoline-powered car on diesel, very bad things happen. You can ruin the fuel system. Certainly it will clog the fuel filter, and it can cause severe engine damage. So here is this fellow with a gas tank full of diesel, and he hasn't started it. What does he do? Well, he was smart. He realized his error before it had destroyed his car. He talked to the people at the station, and they got a tow truck in, and the car was taken to a shop so that they could drain all this fuel out of the fuel system, clean up the mess, and then he could put gasoline in his fuel system. One could summarize this story by saying the devil's in the details. It really matters when you're fueling up a car that you choose fuel that is appropriate to that car. The second story occurred also a number of years ago. I found myself at a meeting, at a big symposium for work, and at the end of the day, three of us who knew each other professionally decided to go out to dinner at a nice restaurant. We did so, and we were living the good life. We had wonderful food, excellent beverage. The atmosphere in the restaurant was superb. It was all very high quality. The conversation was most pleasant, and we covered a lot of different topics. I don't recall who suggested it, but one of the three of us suggested that perhaps we should go to Ireland and take the wives along and just have a big adventure exploring some of the places in Ireland. It sounded like a great idea, so we brought that idea home with us, and it resonated with the spouses. Everybody was all in. Everybody was really interested in this adventure. So with some phone calls and messages, we coordinated our efforts and purchased airline tickets. We're going to Ireland. We flew together on the same plane out of Atlanta, and our flight went to Dublin, where we would connect to a smaller aircraft, a smaller flight, that would take us to Limerick, which is our destination from which we would project our trip. We would rent a couple of cars in Limerick and drive around. The trip was all planned, and it would take us a little over a week. My wife and I were by that time seasoned travelers, and we were very familiar with going to Europe. Some of the other people on this trip were not familiar. One of our fellow travelers had never been out of the United States. We exchanged information with each other about our preparation, and one of the things that we shared was the potential need for converting electrical plugs for the different type of electrical outlets that they have in Europe and the UK. We discussed having one of these, which is a converter that allows you to put this on the end of a device intended for use in the United States and then plug it into the current locally. Everybody had some of those little converters. On the second day at breakfast, we were told a story by one of the couples. The wife had washed and dried her hair. Well, she tried to. The washing was not difficult. That was no problem. But the drying turned out to be a big challenge for her because she had brought her hair dryer to blow dry her hair, and it was intended for use in the United States. That's where she got it. That's where she used it. She pulled out her converter and put it on the hair dryer. She plugged it into the socket and proceeded to blow dry her hair. The voltage of outlets in the United States is described as 110 volts. The voltage in Europe and UK is 220 volts. This hairdryer that she had brought was not compatible with the power supply available through the outlet. It immediately burned out. Now, she was not injured, but the inner workings, the switches and the heating element, the motor, all the parts inside that work with electricity were destroyed within seconds. Because of her desire to wash and dry her hair during this trip, she was forced to buy another hair dryer that was compatible with the electricity of that area. It was a number of days later that she reported her second problem with the electricity because she had tried to use her curling iron, a device to make curls in her hair, and she plugged it into the same converter, and the same result occurred. It was burned up within a few seconds once she turned it on. I don't believe that she replaced that with a 220 volt compatible device. Now, I don't tell you these stories to make her look foolish or to aggrandize myself. I don't want to make my wife and myself appear to be superior. No, that's not the point. The point is, the devil's in the details. If you have an electrical device and you plug it into a power supply, it really matters if it's compatible. So again, the devil's in the details. The third anecdote comes from very recently, 2 days ago. We have a truck that we use to pull the travel trailer. It's big and powerful, and it's the only vehicle we have that's strong enough and heavy enough to pull that travel trailer. In recent years, since the pandemic, we've not been pulling the trailer much, so the truck needs to be maintained, so I drive it every week or so. But because it gets poor gas mileage, I don't drive it a lot. I want to maintain it, I don't want it to deteriorate, and I don't want the battery to go dead. 2 days ago, it was my time to drive the big truck. When I turned it on, it started, it was fine, but I immediately got an alarm that it was very low on gas. I thought that's very odd because my habit was to never let that truck get very low on gas. We live in a remote area in the mountains, and to have a truck that doesn't have any fuel is not good. So I always make sure that it has at least a half a tank of gas. So when the alarm went off and I checked the fuel gauge, it showed that it was completely out of gas. I tried to recall the last time I used it. I couldn't come up with a memory that I had intentionally parked the car depleted of fuel, so I suspected that perhaps someone had siphoned the fuel out of that tank. Now that has merit because the other two vehicles that we have locked gas caps. You can't easily siphon fuel out of the other two cars, but this truck has no way of locking the fuel system. So for me, at this point, the best explanation is that someone siphoned out the fuel. They pumped fuel out of the tank and stole it. Fuel in the United States is expensive. If one goes to a gas station, they're going to pay between $4 and $5 a gallon. So we do occasionally see fuel being stolen in the United States. However, if the fuel in that truck was stolen, there's a catch. The catch is that that truck doesn't use ordinary gasoline. It can, but it's a flex fuel truck. In the United States, flex fuel vehicles can either use gasoline or they can use a fuel called E85. E85 is 85% ethanol and 15% gasoline. If a truck or a car is designed for E85, there are advantages to using it. It's cheaper and it works better in those vehicles. If you put E85 in a car not intended for it, performance is terrible, fuel mileage is terrible, and you can damage the car. It is estimated that about 8% of the vehicles on the road in the United States are designed for E85. Less than half of those vehicles actually use E85 because it's not that readily available. Most gas stations don't have it. So when I fuel that truck up, I have a filling station, a gas station down in Santa Cruz that sells E85, and it's a lot cheaper. The truck works fine with that E85 because it's designed for it. That's the only fuel I've put in that truck during the past couple of years. Now, if I was on a long road trip, I would just use gasoline because it's hard to find E85 on a long road trip. It wouldn't be worth it. But around here, I just go to the same filling station, get the E85, and so that tank was all E85. So it is likely someone pumped the fuel out of that fuel tank and stole it, thinking that it was gasoline. However, if that's what happened, they didn't get gasoline, they got E85. And using that in a car would not work very well at all. Going forward, I'm going to keep an eye on that fuel level, and if it appears someone has stolen more fuel, I'll have to get a locking gas cap for that truck. It's not very convenient to use one of those, but I may be forced to if we have a fuel thief in the area. So for the thief who may have stolen fuel out of my truck, again, we can agree that the devil's in the details. This person was trying to steal gasoline, but they got this other ethanol-based E85 fuel, which for most purposes is not good. The other maxim that we can apply to this story is that crime doesn't pay. I invite comments below, and if you like videos like this, be sure to click on this one next. See you soon.